Welcome to Unit 13, The Right Thing to Do, Ethics as an Area of Knowledge. This presentation will not help you to distinguish right from wrong. Hopefully you're learning to do this as you journey through life. It will not tell you what you must do in any given situation either. In short, it's not meant to be a lecture on morality. This presentation will introduce ethics as an area of knowledge, as in the DP core component theory of knowledge. It will also introduce a few ways in which we can examine ethics as well as knowledge frameworks in ethics. So, what do you think about the following questions? Is there such a thing as moral knowledge? Does the rightness or wrongness of an action depend on the situation? Are all moral opinions equally valid? Is there such a thing as a moral fact? What makes us human? One thing often said to distinguish humans from other animals is morality. Can we really know? A key question in ethical discussions in TOK is therefore whether we can really know whether something is moral. What do moral values do for us? What is peculiar about moral values is that they seem to embody obligations for action. Key areas of discussion in ethics. The first one is the issue of moral rules. Is being moral about following rules? So, what about those who question whether moral rules really exist at all? Should moral rules ever be broken? If so, under what circumstances? Are humans essentially altruistic or selfish? Where is the location of moral values? In the consequences of an action or in the motivation for an action? Moral reasoning. Using reason to individually or collectively decide what morally one ought to do. Moral reasoning could be about value judgments. Now, some people argue that moral values are just reflections of personal taste. For example, I don't like spinach is on a par with abortion is unacceptable. The criticism of this is we accept people's preferences but expect justification and reasons for value judgments. Here's a simple model for moral arguments. Arguments about value judgments usually refer to a commonly agreed moral principle, argue that a particular action falls under it, rest on the truth of the alleged facts, rely on people being consistent in their judgments. Consistency. People may not apply rules consistently or have inconsistent principles. Facts. Disputes about principles are often based around disputes about facts. Even if the facts are clear, moral judgments may differ. Disagreements about moral principles. Moral principles may be as different as different languages. If we don't all share the same underlying moral principles, how can we apply moral reasoning? Here's the second one. Moral relativism. According to moral relativism, there is no such thing as moral knowledge or universal values. Values are culture-based. Ethics and morality are just customs or conventions. Arguments for relativism. The diversity argument states that there are too many diverse opinions for there to be objective moral values. The lack of foundations argument states that appealing to perception and reason does not work for ethical judgments. There is no way to get from an is statement to an ought statement. Relativism seems to encourage tolerance of values other than our own. Here are the criticisms. If you want to be tolerant of everyone, you cannot be a relativist because not all cultures are tolerant of other opinions. So you would have to accept that it's equally acceptable to be intolerant. It is difficult to be tolerant of some extreme views, for example, genocide. Arguments against moral relativism. There are some core values common to all cultures. For example, most have rules about violence, protection of property, and honesty. Criticism. For most of history, people have had no moral concern for outsiders who do not belong to their community. However, in recent times, the idea of the tribe is slowly expanding to include all humans. Another one is the self-interest theory. Here's how it goes. Even if there is moral knowledge, we are incapable of acting on it because humans are basically selfish. There are different arguments in the self-interest theory. The first one is the definitional argument. You always end up doing what you most want to do because you choose to do it, otherwise you wouldn't do it. Even if you think you're being altruistic, you're just avoiding feelings of guilt, so are actually being selfish. The criticisms of this are, selfish cannot be used as a criticism if everyone is selfish. Some people get pleasure from helping others. That does not seem selfish, but it can be argued that they only do it to make themselves feel good. The evolutionary argument. We have evolved to be naturally selfish and competitive to succeed in the struggle for survival. Criticisms. Edward O. Wilson, a biologist, said, cooperative individuals generally survive longer and leave more offspring. Young babies and monkeys have demonstrated empathy, so it seems to be a natural part of our makeup. The hidden benefits argument. We get gratitude, praise, a good reputation, and the feel-good factor from helping others, so do it from self-interest. If we are nice to others, they may help us when we need it, is equal to self-interest. Criticism. Some actions do not appear to have any reward. For example, leaving a tip for a waiter you will never see again. Fear of punishment argument. The main thing that prevents us doing things to benefit only ourselves is the fear of punishment, whether legal or punishment in the afterlife. Criticisms. There is no reason to think that all good things are motivated by fear, although some are. If a god thought you were only doing good to avoid punishment after death, would it count as good? Even if you knew you wouldn't be found out, there are still some things you wouldn't be willing to do. Here are some more theories of ethics. Religious ethics. The simplest solution to different views of right and wrong would be to have a book of rules. Some people think that such books are to be found in religion. The criticism is, religious rule books guide moral behavior, but they sometimes lack advice on key areas, are worded ambiguously, include punishments that are not morally acceptable today. Plato argued against it. He said, if something is good because God says it is good, would it be bad if God changed his mind? Or is it intrinsically good? In which case, we do not need God to tell us what is good. Duty ethics. According to some philosophers, people do their duty according to what is expected. Every duty is connected to a right. For example, duty not to kill is connected to the right to life. Duty not to steal is connected to the right to property. Criticism. People have conflicting feelings on what is right and wrong. Immanuel Kant's approach to ethics. He said, if consistently breaking a particular rule would result in chaos, then it should be generalized as a duty rule. We engage in special pleading, making excuses to justify our own behavior that we could not find acceptable in someone else. We should adopt a dual conception of ourselves as not only me, but also one among others. This idea lies behind the golden rule, do as you would be done by. We can be more objective in deciding duty by asking, how would I feel if someone did that to me? Kant argued that no individual should be given preferential treatment or discriminated against. It is never right to sacrifice one individual's life for the greater good. It may be the general good, but it is the only life they have. They are not only one among others, they are also a me. An individual has dignity, that is, sure, he is irreplaceable. Something of value can be replaced by something of equal value, but something with dignity is irreplaceable. The importance of motives. The moral value of an action is determined by the motive for which it is done. To be truly moral, our actions should be motivated by reason rather than feeling. There are three reasons for doing things: expected reward, sympathy, or duty. Kant thought that actions only have moral value if they're done because of duty. Sometimes duties conflict. Kant's approach can lead to rule worship, that is, moral absolutism. That means following rules no matter what the context or situation. A judgment may be consistent and based only on reason, but it can ignore feelings and be morally cold. For example, what outrages most people about Nazi war criminals is not their inconsistency but their inhumanity. Here's another theory: utilitarianism. The theory of utilitarianism states that we should seek the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. It was developed by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. They tried to establish ethics on a scientific foundation. Actions are right insofar as they tend to increase happiness. Actions are wrong insofar as they tend to decrease happiness. Total net happiness, or TNH, for an individual is equal to the sum of pleasures minus the sum of displeasures. Gross national happiness is equal to the sum of individual total net happiness. Here's what works. It is simple. It is democratic. Every individual counts towards the GNH. It accounts for short and long-term consequences of our actions. It is egalitarian. It can, for example, justify the redistribution of wealth by taxes. That is, $1 paid by a rich person is worth less to them than $1 received by a poor person. Practical objections to it. Happiness cannot be objectively measured. A constant stream of pleasure may not make for a happy life. Consequences of actions are in the future and are difficult to know for certain. Theoretical objections to utilitarianism. There are such things as bad pleasures, for example, malicious pleasures which are derived from the suffering of other people. Empty pleasures do not help us develop our potential. Shopping, eating chocolate. Kant would say that it is the motive and not the pleasure that counts. It does not allow for moral obligations or human rights. Rule utilitarianism. We should measure the rightness or wrongness of an action by whether it conforms to a rule that promotes general happiness. Individual choices would rest on what would happen to general happiness if I break this rule that aims to give the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Closer to Kant's duty ethics, except that it is more flexible. For example, Kant's rule, never tell lies, could be reinterpreted as never tell lies unless you can prevent a great deal of suffering by doing so. Key points. in this presentation. When we argue about ethics, we typically appeal to various moral principles, but we might wonder how these principles can be justified. According to moral relativism, our values are determined by the society we grew up in, but it could be argued that some core values are universal, that is, absolutism. We might try to derive moral values from religion, but Plato put forward an argument against this, and such an approach is in any case not going to satisfy an atheist. According to Immanuel Kant, ethics is a matter of doing your duty, and the test of whether something is your duty is whether or not it can be consistently generalized. Despite its attractions, Kant's approach to ethics is too absolutist and leaves us with no way of solving moral dilemmas. According to utilitarianism, happiness is the only thing that is good in itself, and we should seek the greatest happiness of the greatest number. Rule utilitarianism is a compromise between motives-based ethics, that's Kant's categorical imperative, versus consequences-based ethics, that is utilitarianism. Knowledge frameworks, the what and the how of ethics. The scope and applications. Morality is often regarded as concerned with praiseworthy or blameworthy reasons for action. Ethics is more generally concerned with answering the question, what should one do? Moral values seem to be distinct from other sorts of value in that they produce obligations to action. An ethical viewpoint seems to imply that the individual takes the interests of others into consideration as well as his or her own. For ethics, the concepts of the language. Categories, acts that are prohibited, permitted, or required. What should one do might be a different question than what is one morally obliged to do. General requirement for ethical judgments to be universalized, so they have a public dimension almost by definition. Rights seem to be goods that the group is obliged to provide for the individual, so each right carries a corresponding obligation or duty. Moral language contains a built-in requirement for action. Now we come to the methodology. Taking an ethical framework as a starting point and reasoning from general principles to a specific situation. Extracting morally significant aspects using reason from the perception of the current situation. Ethical principles can be defined by checking them against our moral intuitions. Our moral intuitions can be refined by checking them against ethical principles. Consequentialist ethics requires imaging consequences of an action and evaluating them. The historical development has been vast. The nature of ethical thought might have changed somewhat from that held by Greek thinkers of the 4th century BCE. Perhaps the emphasis now is less on virtues and moral rights. Links to personal knowledge. Moral obligations require action, so morality impacts the individual. Why should living a moral life matter? Is living a moral life a question of having the right character? One might be guided by emotion and intuition, but moral judgments seem to be more than simple expressions of personal preference.